Hi guys, George again here at Optics Warehouse and with another edition of our FAQ series. So, first question, FFP or SFP for me? What I mean by that is first focal plane or second focal plane and what's best for you. Now, it all depends. It's not a simple yes or no. I would say for the vast majority of people, especially if you're hunting, HFT, FT, bench rest, the sort of main disciplines in the country, second focal plane is going to be more than likely better. First focal plane really comes into its own in that sort of more PRS tactical style of shooting where you haven't necessarily got the time to dial, and so you're using and relying on your holdovers a lot more. Obviously, yes, in HFT you use your holdover more, but you're keeping the magnification the same, so you don't need the reticule to change. It's not that one's better than the other. It is purely down to one is good for holdovers over the course of the magnification range, first focal plane or FFP, whereas one gives you a finer reticule that is usable throughout the magnification range, and you always know what it is, especially if you spent some time with it and learnt it. Second focal plane. Where there's a bit more of a grey area is hunting, and it's really down to the individual. For my personal preference, I use second focal plane purely because I'm shooting in close, ratting, stuff like that, where I don't want high magnification, and I find most first focal plane scopes, the reticule is just too fine to use on those magnifications. I have to crank it up, which then limits my field of view. But other people, if you're doing more longer range hunting, or you're used to shooting on higher magnifications, you might get on with a first focal plane. I mean, the Element Helix range, for example, is become very popular, and so did the Falcon Endurers at one point. Again, all first focal planes, so people are using them and to great effect as well. So, hope that answers that. I know it's more of a it's up to you type of answer, but hey ho. So, question number 2 is this scope suitable for a Centifier? Now, the way you tell that is in the manufacturer's spec, there'll be a shock rating or caliber rating. Some manufacturers are better at others than this. What they'll do is they'll put a caliber specific rating, such as 50 cal, 12 gauge, 375 Holland, 338 Lapua. They tend to be the most common that you see. You do have to be a little bit careful with it because none of them have actually been tested on a proper rifle as such. What they do is they attach them to a drop machine, essentially. It's a big sled that's on a vertical axis. You strap the scope to it and it drops, free falls it to a sudden stop at the bottom where it creates the shock. This is where you also get the joules measurements that you see. I think the way they rate it is 9,000 joules is the same as a 50 cal BMG. Obviously it's not quite the same because it is a different shock impulse. What I usually find is that most modern scopes are more than capable of standing up to recoil of up to a 308. Going past that and you're experiencing real recoiling calibers that you get where you want to start looking at the shock rating of a scope really and maybe spending a bit more for that. But for the majority of people it's not an issue. Another one just to sort of sneak it in there is spring guns. Even sub 12 spring guns, they do tend to be more destructive than the majority of centerfires when it comes to scopes, and it's because you have a recoil both ways. You have the piston moving forward, you have the inertia coming back, and you have a longer lockup time, so the scope's under vibration for longer. Most modern scopes are up to it, but it's always something to bear in mind. So, question number 3. I can't zero my scope. Is my scope faulty? This is a question we get a lot. I can't get this zeroed. It's the scope's fault, or, where am I going wrong? Now, what you need to do if you're experiencing this, sometimes it's more obvious than others, but if it's not particularly obvious why, what I would always start with is to check your adjustment range against the manufacturer's spec. So wind your turret, elevation turret for example, all the way up to the top, count how much adjustment you're getting through the entire range, and then check that against manufacturer's specs. So say if it says 40 MOA and you're only getting 20, well, you know there's something off there. The other thing is you then need to check that it's actually adjusting the reticule that amount. Easiest to do for Centifier guys, where you can just do it at 100 meters, but if you go to 50 yards, you know, you just halve it and so on as you come in. And you just check that it's moving your point of impact the specified amount. The next thing to check or to do is what I'd call a box test. It is where you zero your scope as best you can, and then you do a say up 10, right 10, down 10, left 10, and then at each point you shoot, and you should end up shooting the 4 points of a box. And then you do the same the other way. So you go left 10, down 10, right 10, up 10. And each and every time it should return to 0. If it's not, that could indicate a tracking issue with the scope. If you're doing all that, and say a very common issue is I'm trying to zero my airgun at 25 yards, 35 yards, whatever it is, and it's still shooting low. That's more than likely just how that scope is interacting with your setup, your pellets, your mod, the whole package as a whole. What you can do with that is, one, wind your windage to the center again, because if you imagine inside your scope tube you have another tube. If that's wound all the way to the right, it can't move up quite so much. So sometimes just doing the elevation first can free up that bit of travel to allow you to get on. The second thing is, it could, as I say, just be how it's interacting. What I would recommend is shimming the rear mount. Now, what I would do is put a layer of black electrician's tape, then each layer getting shorter and shorter as you build it up. No more than 5 layers as an absolute max. Clamp it all back up and shoot. Now, what this will do is it will angle the scope down like that, effectively moving your reticule down, hopefully more towards your point of impact. Then you now should hopefully be on, so you can either leave it and go, yep, that's working, cool, or you can think about lapping your rings, which is probably a more expensive way of doing it, and for the majority of people not needed. You could think about then going to adjustable rings to get a more solid version, an adjustable rail, or a rail with built-in MOA. And that just sort of gives you an indication of what's going on there. But the first thing, as always, is just check it against the specs. So, question number 4. Does the base NV90 record audio? Yes and no. Basically, you might get the sound of your shot if it's a Centifier recorded, or someone particularly loud shouting, but it's not going to pick up much else. Sort of more just ambient noise. It comes across as static most of the time. Question number 5. I'm using the Citron S2 36x42, considering an upgrade to the S3. What would be the benefit? So, for those of you who don't know, Citron make 2 ranges of bench rest scope. One's the S2, a fixed 36 times scope by 42 objective, and then they do it in an S3, which is a 40. They do it in a 45 by 45 and a 36 by 45 too. The benefit of going to the S3 over the S2 is that regardless of which magnification range you go to, you're going to get higher clarity in the glass. So you're going to maintain more detail regardless of the distance you're shooting at. You do also go to a side focus, so for most of us right-handed shooters, it is more ergonomic. Also, you avoid that on the S2 I think it's to go to 100 meters, you have to do a second revolution on that adjustment belt at the front. So you avoid that. It just sort of simplifies things. But the main benefit is going to be that clarity in the glass. In terms of things like fussiness, in the 36 times, it's not going to make much difference. In the 45 by 45, the eye box is going to be slightly more fussy because it's a smaller exit pupil of only 1mm. But you're still going to get a higher light transmission and that higher resolution image. And so that's what you get when you pay typically for a manufacturer's higher end glass, essentially. Not always the case when you compare brand to brand, but throughout a brand, the more you pay, essentially, the better the glass you get. Right, I hope that's answered those questions for you guys. If you have any more, please comment them down below or give us a call, and I'll see you next time. Cheers, bye-bye.